Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, George.
Good morning.
Long time no see. Last Thursday. It's been a full week without you in my life. Oh my goodness. I'm so happy to have you back again. How are you?
I'm very good. Yep. Went to Christchurch and did the whole family thing, Easter stuff, and yeah.
Is that something that happens? I always think about family stuff for Easter. I can remember doing family stuff when I was like at school because we'd go away up to Northland for the long weekend, but you kind of had used it as a chance to get whānau together. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it also lines up well with the mid-semester break at Otago University, so it's a good excuse to just shoot up the line and yeah, see the whānau.
I liked someone said to me the other day they took 4 days off work, and 4 days off work gave them an 11-day holiday because there's Easter weekend, 4 days, and then Anzac this weekend.
Yeah.
So they were like, their last day of work was the Thursday, and then they had to go back Tuesday week. So, and they only take 4 days of their holiday. So it gave them an 11-day holiday, which I thought was bloody smart. I think I reckon Anzac Day should always be a weekend. It should be movable. I know that there's a reason it's on the 25th, but I think that's fantastic having it as a actual weekend, because that means next year, what's next year, 2023, it'll be on a Tuesday, and you've got that weird Monday, go to work, Tuesday have a day off, Wednesday go to work. Now, I think all public holidays should be tagged into the weekends. That's just my opinion, though.
Why is Anzac the 25th?
Oh, I don't say the historical. I mean, I think it started up in like 1913 or 19. Sorry,
was it Gallipoli or something?
Straight after one of the after World War One, and then it got kind of, and the date it was on was because of an event that happened in World War One. I'm not sure if it was Gallipoli actually, but there is a reason for it, I guess, is what I'm saying. But you could easily make that a weekend holiday, or rather than it could be the, what is it, for the 25th of April, it could just be the last Monday in April. There you go, easy. You got a long weekend every time. So good to have you back here. Thank you for being back with us. Me and Chewy have held the fort for the last couple of days. I'm glad you had a good time up north. It's so funny. I don't know. You're a young fella, but being an old man and like spending a lot of my time in Auckland when I was growing up and through my adult life, you reference things like, you go down south to Hamilton, or you go up north to Whangarei or whatever. So even after I've been in Dunedin for approaching a decade, it still becomes quite a strange thing to talk about going north to Christchurch, because for a huge portion of my life it was south to Christchurch. But anyway, just me. Okay, Oakley Dokley, we are going to be having a chat today about a few things. One of the things we're going to talk about, and we'll start the show with this, is well, I'm going to call it the controversy around Libs of TikTok. Don't know if it is a controversy, but there's kind of two aspects to this conversation. One is the what Libs of TikTok is, right? And I'll show you some bits and pieces. But the second is what's happened in the last sort of 36, 48, 72 hours, and accusations of doxing. And for those that don't know, I mean, I'll bring it out right now. The definition of doxing is to dox is to search for and publish private and identifying information about a particular individual on the internet. So search for and publishing private or identifying information about a particular individual on the internet, typically with malice intent. So that's what doxing is. So if you put out someone's details that makes it so that they can be tracked and traced, that's what's considered doxing. And in the internet world, doxing, I think it would be fair to say, George, is like the greatest sin, or it certainly has been for a very long time. That if you, I mean, like, when you're talking about something, or you're talking to someone, or even if you're shredding someone on the internet, like some people do, you don't put out information that then enables that person to be tracked, because if you do, they then potentially can come in harm's way. It only takes one nutter to go down the wrong path and then track them. Would that be fair, George?
Yeah, I guess so much of the internet is like based on the ability to communicate anonymously. But lots of people communicate with their full names.
Yeah.
As well. And in that context, I think doxing seems to be more used when it comes to addresses and that sort of thing, physical location.
And also, it's getting harder and harder. I mean, to be honest with you, as people who book interviews and ask people to come on, even if they're not profile people, they're pretty easy to track down. I remember we had Jenny McGee on, who was the nurse who looked after Boris Johnson when he got. I just went to her Facebook page, sent her a message. So
Yeah.
I couldn't turn up to her door and, hi, can you come on? So I didn't know where exactly she was. But actually, when doxing talks about information online that kind of makes them identifiable and contactable, the contactable thing is getting easier and easier and easier and easier. So maybe the idea of doxing is slightly changing to being more about, can you physically get to this person? I don't know.
Yeah,
maybe
because it's a term that's always been based in the culture of the internet. So therefore, it's a term describing that divide between the fleshiness of the physical world and the anonymous nature of online conversations.
Yeah. And like, I mean, you think about it in journalism as well. Journalists do this all the time. Like if you were doing a story on a slumlord, and you said, Jimmy Jones is the landlord of this building, that's fine. But if you said Jimmy Jones is the landlord of his building, his offices are locating at, and his phone number is, that would be an extreme. But I guess the in-between ground is if you went, Jimmy Jones is the landlord of this building, his company, and then listed the company name, which then had an easily trackable office, which then means you could locate him. That's sort of I think the gray area at the moment, because the report or the journalist or the blog or the whatever hasn't actually said, here's his contact details, but it's given information that makes it very easy for a one step to connect with that person.
Well, yeah, I mean, back in the day, I mean, it was very common to see employers and their workplace, bad employers and their workplace being displayed on Fair Go on national television, right?
Yep.
So I think what's happened, and I haven't studied privacy, theoretically or as a scholar or anything, but I'm guessing that privacy in and of itself has changed. Our concept of privacy has changed because we're so interconnected now, because we have these tools now. So, I mean, maybe we're even more precious about it as well now, because in that older case, it was just the local small business tyrant down the road who's an arsehole. Everyone knows where he lives, but nothing really comes of it. And maybe there's an American kind of context here as well that's muddying the waters.
That gun culture,
people,
maybe.
Yeah, people go over and shoot you, or do there's YouTube personalities that or streamers that do go to quite full-on lengths to not get their address out there, because then they get swatted. Or the Proud Boys so Vic Berger, an online content creator, the Proud Boys turned up at his house wanting to fight him because that's part of their initiation. Proud Boys being a alt-right gang, basically, slash sort of online media subculture.
There's also this idea, you're talking about fair go, and actually it's funnily enough, I think it's called a current affair. It's an Australian one. It's been popping up in my YouTube feed the last few days, and it's a similar thing. There'll be the person who sells themselves. I watched one the other day as the wealth guru, but all the people who have been using this wealth guru think that she's now a rip-off merchant. So a current affair turns up to confront them. Camera on the shoulder, reporter with there. In those instances, though, you don't necessarily know where the person is. Certainly on this side of the world, I don't know. I have their name and I have their online sort of what they do, but you don't know where. Like, I'm thinking about the classic fair go situations where reporters had ladders thrown at them and stuff because they turned up. It's unless you're local, like you said, it's much harder to identify where that person is. I mean, if you know it's the dirtbag, that's 3 doors down from you, so be it. But if you're in a different part of the country or the world, I don't think that gives identifiable information as to how to contact that person necessarily. The difference now is because everything's online. If you're talking about an online thing, then almost by definition, you're contactable if you get identified. So maybe again, as you're talking about privacy, there's a difference between sort of personal physical privacy in that sort of media context and information privacy. Maybe it is when it comes to an online presence.
Yeah, well, the other distinction I think we're going to have to make is, are we talking about within journalism with its strong ethical principles, or because to a hacktivist, for example, they measure it. Their measure of, is this person in a position where they should be held accountable in terms of their naming, their measure of that and a journalist's measure of that are going to be different, right? But I think that is sort of the measure that seems to be used. This person is in a position of power, or has used their anonymous status to cause harm or do something like that, then uncovering them their personal information, and by that I mean just name or job or whatever, identifying information is justified. I think those are sort of the scales that people use.
So I mean, we've kind of started talking about it without talking about the whole show. So let's just keep going. So this whole hubbub, this whole situation has popped up because there was an article written for the Washington Post, and you can see it right here, where a reporter has gone behind the scenes. And can I just say, I was going to say, this is not good journalism, meaning what has actually been done is pretty level one. Basically gone on to the domain names. You can do a who as on a domain name. Anyone can do this, and found the phone number of the person who registered a domain name, and that linked to a person's name. This is not really a deep dive, deep throat kind of investigation. It's a pretty simple one that really anyone could have done. This reporter from Taylor Lorenz is her name, from the Washington Post, is the one who did it, and outed, if that's the correct word, the person who is behind this account, Libs of TikTok. We should probably say as well, if you don't know what Libs of TikTok is, Libs of TikTok is a Twitter account. I learned about it from Joe Rogan. So that's one of the criticisms, that there are some people who are magnifying this and they're making it more popular. And it's what the Washington Post article is saying is that the right in America is using Libs of TikTok as a farming system to spread, I guess, propaganda based on a minority position within the left. Because no matter what you say, this is one person on TikTok, and it may or may not be representative of what the whole political left may or may not think. So here's an example of one, and I brought this one up in particularly because one of the criticisms of the Libs of TikTok is they use various tropes and words and angles to make it look like, to further the narrative that left-wing ideologues are trying to groom and sexualize your children. Now, I'll pop back one into Libs of TikTok in a second to show that that's actually, I had to go quite a long way. George was watching me. I had to go quite a long way through to find one that actually used the word groom. But it is there.
Not that far, considering that this is a Twitter account that posts all the time, though.
Yeah, well, true. But I probably think it would be fair to say that the majority of them don't.
But hang on, isn't that a fair indication of of the discourse at the moment, that legislation is, and again, this is getting beyond the doxing, but it's sort of contextual. That's
Sure.
sort of that's the flavor of the discourse at the moment, is that the lefties are trying to make my kid gay, right? That's sort of the dog whistle. Yeah. Just to add some context to people that might not understand.
So, I mean, what the Libs of TikTok does, for people who don't know, and I know most of you know it, I'm trying to suck lemons here, is that it goes into TikTok and it finds, I guess, libs, people who they would refer to as woke, fair enough, whatever, and they just repost their TikTok videos, and then they often add a commentary to it. So this commentary says, and this is a quote from the video, it says, parents need to stay the fuck out of classrooms. And then the owner or the person who runs Libs of TikTok was said, this is what the left really thinks. Listen when they tell you they want to take your kids to groom and indoctrinate them behind your back. So the actual video on Libs of TikTok is someone responding to a comment that says, teachers have no business teaching kids about sexual orientation and gender identity at this age. That's the parents' problem. And this person responds like this.
I'm giving this dude one last chance to get the fucking point. We don't like this. My community specifically does not like this. You want to know why personally I don't like this? Because when it's the parents' problem, that's how you get homophobic kids. That's how you get kids like me with internalized homophobia until they're like 18 or 19 because they finally started going to fucking therapy. If my parents had their way, I wouldn't know shit about the gay community.
Just a side note on the actual way that this person's filming.
The
just
cinematography.
Yeah, can you stop with the massive zoom ins? That's kind of distracting from your message. That's just a thought, just a side note.
Or my own legitimate sexual identity. I came out to them when I was 16. You want to know what they told me? They told me I was going to unalive myself because of this. I was an already depressed teenager. So when you say it's the parents' problem, understand that the parents are not going to make the best decision. They're not going to educate their kids. If it weren't for public school, I wouldn't know shit about the gay community. Unless it's a private school, parents need to stay the fuck out of classrooms.
I think ironically, I didn't think this at the time, George, but she's kind of actually echoed I'm not saying that it's fair, but she's kind of actually echoed the criticisms from the right, because she said if it wasn't for public school, I'd know nothing about the gay community, aka the public school taught me everything I need to know about the gay community. And that's ironically kind of the criticisms that the right's throwing at it. So look, I'm just rolling through a bit, and this is just showing you some more. So this is what it does. Letting kids choose their gender identity is now consent. Parents who let their kids choose their gender are child abusers. So there you go. That's following that narrative as well. So we don't have to follow much more to talk more about it. Diversity is my favorite thing to teach, says non-binary preschool teacher who also makes 4-year-olds pick a pronoun pin every day to wear.
Recently, we started wearing pronoun pins, and the kids get to pick a new pronoun.
So you get the idea. Goes through and finds conversations. Students at something or other school were treated to a drag queen performance by a drag teacher during school hours. Imagine if they focused on teaching math and science and history instead of drag. This is sickening, says this person.
It's funny because cross-dressing has been a huge part of school performances for decades.
That's true. Speaking to someone who went to an all-boys boarding school, my dad went to the same all-boys boarding school. I mean, we used to do our productions with a sister school, but when my dad was at the same school I went to, they had to play all the female roles themselves when they did Gilbert and Sullivan.
It's like this. It's like the Sevens in Wellington. It's like the one night that all the homophobe jocks are able to dress up as chicks.
So that's what Libs of TikTok is. The Washington Post then reported who was behind. So it was a big secret. Libs of TikTok, who was behind it was a big secret. No one really knew. Although they'd done a few interviews, it was always kind of incognito with a voice like this. Oh, that's Libs of TikTok. You know, you never knew who it was. So they kind of outed them. They said who it was. And now the conversation from the right, as they are pill clutching quite a bit, is, oh, doxing. And the conversation from the left is, well, they deserve to be doxed, which is an interesting position to take. And actually, I guess, let's have a look at one left-wing commentary at the moment who have kind of said that. I don't want to be unfair to them, so I'll just play. It's a producer in the background talking about what they think about this person and their name being released publicly. The people who are running Libs of TikTok.
I'll just say, I just want to say her name publicly. I mean, the only problem with this report, in my opinion, would be if they pointed the finger at the wrong person and the actual freak behind this account went unnamed. But I will just say right now, it looks like Newsweek has it. Chaya Rachik you'll find a street easy profile for if you Brown followed up by saying that by searching the phone number listed on the domain registration for Libs of TikTok, you'll find a street easy profile for a Chaya Raychick, who was a licensed real estate salesperson. Interesting, the class back, more populism. This is the sort of populism. This is the type of person who's really amenable to Glenn Greenwald's style of populism, is the bigoted real estate broker.
So there you go. I mean, like, it's just an example that we found, and then the conversation starts. So it seems in this one, the right's saying you should never release information of people publicly, although the right has done that for a very long time. The left is saying, fair enough too, because they were bad enough to be outed. And then the conversation around doxing starts. So has this person been doxed? Are we okay with doxing this person? You know, is it, I mean, to me, the idea we've just talked about it of being able to be tracked down physically is a part of it. So, I mean, you think about wherever you are in the country or the world, a local real estate agent, if you knew their name, the city or suburb they work in, and their job as a real estate agent, you'd be able to get their phone number, where their offices are, their email address, all those sorts of things. Which means, I guess, if you can find their workplace address, you'd be able to make physical contact as well. I don't know, it makes me a smidge uncomfortable that far has gone. But then again, if you just said her name, then you could probably get all those things anyway, because searching her name would bring that up. George, what do you think?
Yeah, well, you said before how easy it was to find who she was as well. So I guess maybe, I don't know. I guess she, in terms of expectations of privacy, obviously she wasn't freely naming who she was. So she was trying to be private, I guess. So I know nothing about Libs of TikTok. I can imagine the sort of moral panic sort of baiting that they do. I mean, we saw it with the grooming sort of thing, where I see doxing, and let's just call it doxing for simplicity's sake, where I see that as not a valid tool of journalism, but a valid tool of political antagonism and political combat, would be like, naming, if there was like a real estate agent in the Octagon doing a big neo-Nazi rally, for example.
Yeah,
I think, well, actually, in terms of journalism as well, that would be totally all right to name them and their job in the local paper, right?
Yeah,
I see that as a totally fair use of what we're calling now doxing.
Do you think we have a different perspective in New Zealand because of the gun thing? I mean, I think about, when they talked about that pizza parlor being a place of pedophiles, and, there being a basement that the Democrats were holding and drinking people's blood, or whatever the fuck they were saying. And then what happened is someone turned up to that pizza parlor with a gun.
That is the history of doxing in America, is actually releasing the information of anti-abortion, of abortion clinic doctors, so people could go and assassinate them. Seems to be, just from what I've been reading this morning, the sort of history of doxing. So it has been not only a tool of political discourse, but political violence in America, and I'm sure elsewhere in the world. Whereas, I guess in the context of, maybe a, you wouldn't say a bakery owner in Dunedin wasn't paying their workers, or no, rather, you wouldn't say, and there is an employer in Dunedin who isn't paying their workers. you'd name them, right, and you'd say where they were and that sort of thing. I wonder for the crime of running Libs of TikTok, I guess this sort of depends on, and that's actually a really good example of why this annoys me sometimes, right? Is that it seems like the real leftist fight, and I know that's sort of annoying to say, the real leftist fight gets sort of left to the side for these more superficial fights on TikTok or whatever it is, Twitter, which are not substitutes for political action. They're just sort of tools for them. But Yeah, I guess that's sort of a. Oh yeah, what I was going to say, Libs of TikTok, the crime of running Libs of TikTok sort of depends on like how we define what Libs of TikTok is, right? Say
Yeah.
it was of interest to actually find out, oh, this huge super PAC is behind this Twitter account or
Yeah.
something like this, right? Or if we again, it's part of part of this internet. How the internet has really kind of changed the environment. Do we see Libs of TikTok as a media organization that needs to be held to account? We want to know, in a democratic, transparent society, we want to know how they're funded, who dictates the agenda at that media organization, all the sort of things that we should, as a transparent, democratic society, want to know. We want to know who's shifting the agenda at this specific institution that seems to have so much influence, even if just on the online space. So I think that's the calculation you have to make, right?
I hear what you're saying, and I think it's really interesting because I always try and relate it to myself and to situations I've been in. So let's just say one day in the future, shall I pick a ridiculous number?
Yes.
We had, I think they've got about 600,000 followers. Let's just say we interact with 600,000 people in what we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm.
Does that therefore give the public the right to know all the things you've just said of Libs of TikTok? Or is it none of their business and we'll run our business or our show however we deem fit? Do you know what I mean? Like the other thing is, having been in an experience where working for radio stations, I have had a letter come to my house that says, do you see how easy it is to track you down? I even though I was an absolute nothing, nobody in that world, had no influence whatsoever, was just a mid-dawn jock on a radio station talking to people. I feel like I've got a bit more of a context to it, and I kind of think, if we ended up having a very large audience, at what point do we then go, oh well, now the public has to know everything that's going on and they have to know all our financial details and what's going on behind us? You know what I mean? I mean, are we suffering a little bit from, because it doesn't affect us, we can go, oh well, it's because we need to know what they're up to. If we were in their position, does everyone need to know what we're up to?
I think I mean it on more of a structural level. Say that we fronted ourselves as a grassroots news network and we were funded by BP. That's I guess what I mean, right? Not that that means our address would get leaked, but that would mean that some sort of background information is leaked. I guess maybe I'm skirting away from doxing a little bit, but I guess I'm just adding in that calculation of like, who should we hold accountable? And when should I mean, this one's quite interesting. I half expect, some super PAC to be behind it, but behind things like this, but it is just some real estate.
I was going to say that, I don't want to interrupt you, but this does seem to be a grassroots, one single individual person.
I mean, maybe there's more reporting to come, but yeah, I mean, that's an indication of, again, politics in the age of the internet and how these sorts of things work. It's just a shame that real estate agent will not be getting the sort of, I guess, the Fox News salary, should we say? I mean, and again, that's how content works, right? It's sort of just it's sort of aggregated and pulled together by a community of people, for better or worse. But yeah, I guess my point was sort of, who do we as a society label as held accountable enough that they should be identified and that they shouldn't be anonymous? And maybe Libs of TikTok is a really sort of low stakes example of this, and maybe would be better off finding high stakes examples.
And just because you've mentioned them, how much would BP have to pay you to throw away all your values, out of interest? Just, we should throw a number out to them, maybe? No? Yes? No? Okay, we won't do that. Yeah, all right. I think it's interesting. I think that the idea of being private, like I said to you before we started, because we couldn't stop talking about this. As much as you this is beneath your academia, George, we couldn't stop talking about it before we started. Is that, you know, if you did something, let's not say this, but if you did something in the media and all of a sudden you had hundreds of thousands of viewers or readers or listeners, if your privacy wasn't protected, you would have hundreds, if not thousands, of communications a day coming through to you. And, you know, it's that element of it as well. And I don't know, it's maybe I'm being naive, and I'll put my hand up and say I'm being naive, but maybe I am. It feels a little bit like the defending someone's right to free speech, even if you find what they're saying abhorrent. You know, like, we might agree that when you look through that Libs of TikTok, it's full of, you know, attacks on LGBT community and teachers, and primarily those two things connected. But if I was to flip it and say, for whatever reason, you know, you or I or someone we know was doing the opposite, and I'll say exposing from their perspective, not that this is necessarily exposing, you know, some radical right agenda, and then they got all their information released, so they were contactable and they had to go into hiding for their safety, would we be okay with that? And I know we said that maybe nuance plays a part. Maybe it does, but also maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, I think that for example, the Charlottesville one is the ones that's already always brought up, right? Those people were out there in public saying Jews will not replace us and all sorts of things, and then cried when they got fired from their jobs, right?
Well, let me throw you a real one out that we didn't talk about yesterday. We were going to, but the Sandyville shooters, the families of the Sandyville victims.
Sandyville?
Sandy Hook victims' families. You know, I mean, as wrong as we know he was, Alex Jones was putting out there what he thought was correct, and then a whole bunch of families were getting actually attacked. Stories of families having to move 7 times because of the information he was putting out there. We'd obviously say that's abhorrent and wrong, but are we okay to say that this is okay? It's not that bad. I mean, yeah, it's just, I guess I'm talking about the principle versus the reality of the nuance, but maybe I can't do that.
But once you're out in a public square calling for, you know, an ethno-state, you're putting yourself out there in a public square calling for an ethno-state, right?
Even if you're anonymous and you don't want to put yourself out there?
Then why are you there? You need to be held accountable, right?
Want your views held? I mean, like, think about there's many podcasts that you don't know who the person is or what they're about and that kind of stuff.
But I'm not talking about podcasts. I'm talking about people in the community calling for an ethno-state, calling for a violent establishment of an ethno-state.
Again, I'll come back to that idea, as naive as it's going to sound to many, is that the defending of people's abhorrent views. Maybe that's something that you and I would.
You're not even going to know who the people are because they're all going to be anonymous.
Well, but what I'm saying is, and I'm not saying this because I'm playing whataboutism. What I'm saying is, you know, what you've just mentioned about wanting to set up that kind of state, the opposing view would also say of the, let's say, far left ideology to set up pick a word they'd use, socialist state or whatever, maybe as abhorrent to them. I'm not saying they're right, but it may be as abhorrent to them. Doesn't mean that I want those people then releasing the information of people who want to set up for a socialist state or whatever.
I'm not talking about what I want. I'm not talking about what I want. I'm talking about the principles I want in my societies or our societies, journalism or politics, or, you know, I'm talking about the community. I'm not talking about the day-to-day sort of lens that I have when I'm on Twitter and I'm on social media, right? It's a more sort of structural thing I'm trying to get across, I think.
All right, maybe that's it. Maybe that I'm thinking specifics and you're speaking more general, and maybe we're saying a similar thing, but on I'm more macro, you're more meta or whatever at the moment. But that's it. All right. Look, it's a conversation which will go on. What I would say is, don't buy into the pearl clutching from some commentators on the right at the moment who would be perfectly happy to do exactly the same thing to the opposing views. That's always something that I think we've got to put out there and remember from wherever we're talking in society. What should we go on with next? Maybe we do Christopher Luxon with Moana Maniapoto, because I think that's a really interesting conversation. Should we do that one?
Yeah.
All right. So there is a program on Māori television. I have to be honest, I haven't caught it yet. Called Te Ao with Moana Maniapoto, who my era remembers her from Moana and the Mole Hunters. She's now a musician with the band called Moana and the Tribe, I believe it is. And it feels a little bit like how Anika Moa has come from the music world, and now she's doing kind of social commentary and having shows on Māori television. It feels like a similar sort of vibe, that she's sharing her perspective of her life and her views now with guests. She had on Christopher Luxon, and they were talking about things like Māori co-governance and treaty issues. And there was one particularly interesting part of the conversation that I think I want to pick up on about. And let's just play this through. It's 90 seconds, and then we'll have a chat.
Excuse me, and a couple of years ago, when you were as part of that business advisory group, you suggested to the Prime Minister that there should be a whole new ministry set up around urban centres and planning. Now, there's a lot of money that would go into that. So is it Māori health in such crisis that we do need to pile more money in and actually be very brave and bold in our thinking?
Yeah, and all we're going to do is we're going to amalgamate, centralise and build a massive bureaucracy that will end up competing with Health New Zealand, and as a result...
No, we're not. No, that's misinformation.
No,
that's misinformation.
I don't think that's the way to go. I don't think that's the way to do it.
So you're into it as...
I'll focus on outcomes.
You're into an assimilationist model. You want the one system that you suggest will work for everybody. In the last 40 years, there have been massive attempts to address inequities within the health system. Since 2000, there was like 220 billion thrown at it. Everybody, all the experts, the Heather Simpson report, the Māori Health Advisory Group, all the NGOs that wrote to you and David Seymour last week, the Waitangi Tribunal with its interim recommendation, they all say we need an independent Māori authority that will work in a certain way. Yeah. Why do you not trust expert advice?
No, because I think we'll end up creating a massive amount of bureaucracy, and by their own admission, the Māori Health Authority won't deliver a single improved health outcome for Māori in 5 years. What is your proposal?
So a great series of questions between the two. Let me just pause that. Actually, let me just refresh that, then it will stop. And what you heard at the end, kind of right versus left politics. Typically, the right will talk about having smaller government. That's like, and they actively say smaller government is better government. Now, if you've heard any of my podcasts over the last 4 or 5 years, and you've been a part of this show at all, you'll know, and probably heard me say before, that I think that's a massive red herring, and that really politicians should drop that saying, and we should not accept that saying, because it's not about a bigger government or a smaller government. It's about a better government. And so when you hear Mr. Luxon starting to talk about creating bureaucracy, what he's actually saying is creating a bigger government. Now, sometimes a bigger government makes sense. I mean, we all know the example when that BP oil refinery blew up in the Gulf of Mexico, and we got told that there was one inspector going around all the wells looking at it. And that's because when Republicans were in, they cut all the numbers of oil platform inspectors. Now, that's a moment where bigger government, i.e. more inspectors, might have stopped or certainly helped when it comes to a disaster. So it's not about big government. There's no question that there's probably some parts of bureaucracy that could be slimmed down. It's not about small government, because there are some parts of government which need more put into it. It's about better government. So I hear the conversation around the Māori Health Authority, and I think it's unquestionable, looking at the stats, that there is an issue when it comes to the health system we currently have and Māori outcomes. That says to me something needs to be put more towards Māori outcomes. What Mr. Luxon is probably saying, but I'm being a little bit generous, is we can handle that within a one-size-fits-all structure. And what it seems the experts are saying, his response as well, if you notice, to the why do you disagree with the experts, was too much bureaucracy. It wasn't actually a particularly good response to come about the expertise. But the experts' response, and many response from that side, is like, actually, we need a, from my words now, a special department to focus on this special issue. And I think about that, and I think, people who have breast cancer, for example, they have a special department, special funding for a special issue, whereas perhaps 60% of the population never get access to that and never need that. So they have something set aside just for them for that issue. Expand that by 1% and you've got Māori. And that's why I see the Māori Health Authority as, when I say not a bad thing, what I mean is everything can be run badly or run poorly, but the concept of a Māori Health Authority to focus on a specific issue for a specific group of people, I don't see why anyone would have a problem with that, unless, for example, they were playing the political game and, you know, voicing to their voters what they think they might want to hear. George.
Yeah, like a dog whistle.
Yeah,
like
you could say that.
I think it is very similar to previous sort of stuff we've done around this. And David Seymour, we had David Seymour on, encourage people to look at that. And your example about the breast cancer sector of the health is very similar to the disabled parking example.
Yeah, sure.
Right. Yeah. And then when we were talking about that, it seemed to come back to this the fact that it's a racial segregation that Mr. Luxon and others on the right of New Zealand politics get really uncomfortable about, right? And they can sort of like, I guess, like cloak it in that classic left-right spectrum of big government, small government, whatever it is, bureaucracy equals bad, right? Bloated, all these sort of adjectives. And then, but yeah, I think there's always this undercurrent of this racial anxiety that for some reason there's going to be segregation, or that there's going to be governance that is somehow going to hurt the white man, right? That seems to be what it comes, the racial aspect that it comes back to, their anxiety, unless we take them at their word that they are just really worried about bloated bureaucracy.
But then if you follow it, see, what I'd like to do is then follow that through. So what they're saying is, and I'll just sort of an example, and bear with me, because when I think of something off the top of my head, it may not quite follow through clearly, but George, you're smarter than me, so you'll be able to figure it out. If we follow that through, that means that any other area that has like a special setup or a special group, but following their logic, we should get rid of. So what about the retirement commissioner? What about money and things set up specifically for the retirement community and people going into that area or people needing help in that area? I mean, that to me, so if we forget the race issue and we go, there is a sector of the community that needs certain resources for certain reasons. Now that can actually be put across all sorts of groups. But when you say, when that sector is this race, as you say, that seems to be when the issue is. And that seems to be, like I said, with Mr. Seymour when he came on, and we were talking about, you know, having one system and making us all equal under the race. And he was saying how that's not racist. And I was saying, well, the reason it's seen as racist, to reiterate what I said then, is because that's the only thing you ever talk about wanting to see equality in. Like, that's the only thing you want to level out, is advantage based on race as far as your public statements. But all the other protected classes, whether it's age or disability or sexuality or, you know, whatever it is, or religion, you're okay for there to be advantages for those because, and he actually said this in our conversation, because there's good reason, for example, a special car park for a disabled person. Yeah. So what if there's good reason for more funding and an agency to be set up to help with Māori health? Isn't that therefore the same thing?
Yeah, I think this is definitely going to become a major sort of topic of the election, right? And in some ways, that's sort of will almost automatically serve Luxon, right? If he can keep hammering the drum on big bloated bureaucracy with the dog whistle of the racial stuff, that will serve obviously him. I'm always like looking through these things through the lens of like my grandmother, it was good to go visit her because we sit down and watch the 6 o'clock news. And so I'm always like thinking of these like issues through how she sees the world as this little old school white woman who's like has all these deep racial anxieties, right? And also goes to the voting to the ballot box. And it was interesting talking to her about, for some reason she liked Luxon more than the deputy leader of the National Party, even though she loves Jacinda. For some reason, yeah, I don't know. I should have dig deeper into that. Anyway, sorry.
So it's interesting, and not to delve into your family's personal beliefs or anything, but it'd be interesting to know why people of that generation or people in general have that deep-seated concern around racial issues. And is it because of these dog whistles? Is it for some other reason? Because that actually could help this whole situation altogether. Because like I said, if we take the word race out of it and just talk about a sector of society that needs help, or a sector of society that was screwed over and needs recompense, or a sector of society that is overrepresented in crime stats because of the way the system's set up, then it's a little bit like I used to talk about global warming, climate change. And I said, let's stop talking about global warming, climate change. Let's start talking about pollution. No one is pro-pollution. And actually, if you ticked all the pollution issue boxes, then you're kind of ticking the global warming, climate change issues as well. So there's a packaging of this that could be done to help people understand what's going on rather than buy into the dog whistles and the issues that some on the right seem to be raising as big issues, but are not prepared to identify said same issues in another class is
it's
the same thing.
It's definitely those premises that need to be educated, right? I mean, it comes back to the fact that they wouldn't say that, historically New Zealand was set up as a white supremacist state, right? It wouldn't count those premises of the Māori are hard done by. They say that's bullshit, right? The generations like my grandmother, and I guess those are the premises that need to be sort of reconfigured.
But even in that premise, the idea of white supremacy, I mean, I'm not trying to be a PR guy here, but I don't think many people would argue the idea that Caucasian New Zealanders, white people in New Zealand, have had a massive advantage for the first 150 years, and the deck's been loaded in their favor. There wouldn't be many people who disagreed with that state. Maybe the whole white supremacy conversation needs to be repackaged in a way that people will understand and can then come on board and see where and how the inequity is there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think they'd probably
they might agree.
Nazis. They might agree with it, but they'll dodge around it, right?
But maybe, but it's that idea of leading horse to water. If you can get them on board with the premise of, and this is why this area is called, for example, white supremacy, or this is called climate change. It's like when you lay out in America, when you lay out the facts of what Obamacare is, it's got like an 80% support. When you add the word Obamacare, it becomes like 30% of the Republicans drop off their like of it. So I think it's not
just forget I said white supremacy. Then just put in another word that's better.
No, but I'm not. But I actually think this is important. This is not about you and me or us and how we're talking. But I'm just saying, if people understood what it's like when people talk to in the US, they were like, defund the police. They didn't actually mean defund the police. They mean reallocate funds into better areas to serve the community. Now they used a term that then got spun very quickly, and then that's what it became was we want the police to have no money. I guess what I'm saying is, without trying to placate fuckwits who just wanted to cause trouble, if there's that group in the middle that then listen to the fuckwits and go, well, the police don't want to have, well, I'm not a white supremacist or whatever it is, or I don't believe in climate change. But if we can help them understand, if we can lead that horse to water, to coin a phrase we use a lot in this show, then maybe we can help the end game of people understanding why and what's going on. Maybe.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to move into our last topic of today, and that is going to be one that is, I think we might have talked about this once or twice before, and it's about streaming services and what streaming services you have. and what streaming services you use. On Today FM, it might have been yesterday actually, Lloyd Burr was talking about the streaming services he had, and Netflix, I wouldn't say they're in trouble, but Netflix has had a bit of an issue over the last few days.
But Netflix's shares plummeted by 25% overnight on the news that it had lost subscribers for the first time in its history, with 200,000 people, give or take, scrapping their subscriptions. And it got me thinking, should I cancel my Netflix? Should I cancel my other services too, like my Disney Plus and my Neon? And am I really getting value for money from these streaming services? I've found myself using TVNZ On Demand quite a lot recently, mainly because of Grand Designs, because I love that show. But there are also some great doco channels there. There's also some great local content, and it's all for free. You've got to do one ad every 15 minutes or so. I can't remember the last time that I used Neon or Disney. Actually, the last time I used Disney was about 3 weeks ago when my nieces were up and we watched Zootopia. So I don't really use it. And Netflix, well, that's slow at adding content, new decent content, and it takes, ages to make that good content, I guess, so it doesn't come up that often. Add to the fact that New Zealand's Netflix doesn't have the vast amount of content that the US and the UK markets have. And the prices for Netflix, they've just gone up. So is it worth it? The cheapest Netflix plan is $12.99 a month. The cheapest Disney Plus plan is also $12.99 a month. The cheapest Neon is $15.99 a month.
There's a couple of things about this which I find interesting. The first, I like how their black background matches with our black background. The first is the share price dropped by a quarter, 25%, because they lost 200,000 subscribers. Now, Netflix, I was just looking it up while that clip was playing, has 222 million subscribers. 200,000 is not even like 1/10 of 1%. I find it amazing that they would drop, their share price would drop 25%, a quarter, based on that. I wonder if there's other things going on as well, because with 222 million people, I would think that actually that would be attrition. I mean, that many people would die and their accounts would finish in that kind of time frame, I would think. So that was the first part of it. But then the second part of it was just talking about subscription and stuff in general. And I agree with Lloyd Burr. I think I said this on a previous show, is that several years ago, I basically criticized TVNZ On Demand because they were playing more ads between their content and at random times than actually were playing on TVNZ. So if you had a 3.5 ad break on TVNZ, sometimes on TVNZ On Demand, there was 5 minutes worth of ads. And I'm like, why the fuck would you watch this when I can record it off the TV and zip through the ads sort of thing? But now they've got the mix right. You might have 30 seconds of ads occasionally. It's worth it. It's certainly worth the time. It's worth what I'm prepared to pay for it in my time to use TVNZ On Demand. So I think they've nailed it down. But then also subscriptions. I think we talked about this a few weeks ago a little bit, and I worked out what I was spending, and I'm a little bit in shock actually, and I've been meaning to reassess and relook at the things that I'm doing. On the flip side to that is I do watch some stuff online for free and I'm not entitled to watch. So what am I prepared to pay, I guess, ethically and morally, to have free content that I can access whenever and however I want, realizing that someone's got to pay for it as well.
Yeah. I want to say it's good to see Lloyd Burr back on the airwaves. I'm proud that he's an alumni actually of the media film communications department, which I'm a member of. So
nice.
Very proud. I don't know where he's been. I thought he was like TV3's correspondent in Europe.
I think he was doing Drive for Magic for a while as well, wasn't he? I think he went from whatever his TV role was to a radio role, and then he was one of the few that got dragged across from Magic to the new Today FM. I think, I could be wrong with that, but I'm pretty sure he did move into that drive time radio role for that talk station preceding Today.
I feel like maybe the streaming, the bubble's bursting, right, for streaming. Maybe that, and there's going to be a sort of, I mean, this would be amazing if there was like a sort of a return to the sort of culture of piracy that we saw maybe in the mid noughties,
right?
And a rejection of streaming services and their costs, or at least a more competitive subscription costs throughout streaming services. That happens because of this, what seems to be a bursting bursting bubble, right? Because that's what they rely on is subscriber revenue, but also beyond that, as a traded company, they rely on perception, right? And if the perception is that they're no longer making content, or it's falling flat, then
the model is pretty successful for them at Netflix. Like I just did the 222 million users, even using the least amount per month, which is 13 New Zealand dollars. They're bringing in close to $3 billion a month from their subscriber base, which it will be more than that because that's basically on the entry level cost of Netflix, but New Zealand dollars. I'm always a little bit hesitant in this conversation because thinking about extremes, like if we went to a piracy model and there was no subscriptions, then there'd be no content because they got to pay for it. So
no, they can just perception the money out of thin air.
But that's why I think TVNZ has got it right. They're on demand service where I'm prepared to pay an ad, 30 or 60 seconds. I'm okay with that, and so I'm okay with their model. Radio stations, we've done it for a long time where we listen to ads. I don't really listen to radio much anymore, but we listen to ads between the songs or between the talking. Television has got ads that play every 7 minutes or whatever it is, and that's the price we pay for those free services. I hear you saying, and I wonder if rather than going back to a piracy model, as you call it, I wonder if there's going to be a reckoning with these services on their pricing structure. Like I have to say, I think that I think it's Apple TV. I got a free 12 months when I got my phone, but I think it's really like he talked about Disney Plus there. We have Disney Plus here, but it was $100 for the whole year, like if you bought it up front. And to me, I mean, it's an amount of money, but it doesn't feel like a huge amount of money to have that there when the kids want it or when I want it, or we're in the process of watching all 22 Marvel Universe movies again, sort of thing. So it seemed okay. Now I could have done that online for free, but the online service for free doesn't necessarily have the ability to come back and watch where you're up to, and it's a bit more, finicky sort of thing.
With the TVNZ on demand thing, I mean, I'm not calling for everyone to suddenly be pirating individually, but imagine if there was like this collective entity that we were all a part of, that we could collectively pull all our money together and buy stuff. It's a country. We could all come together as a country and have something like TVNZ on demand with all these amazing films and documentaries.
Well, that's called a public broadcasting fund, isn't it? That's what the BBC is. Yeah. I actually am okay with that concept of having a licensing fee of like $50 a year or $100 a year or $40 a year or whatever it is to support that doesn't faze me in the slightest. The other answer, of course, is YouTube, because YouTube is the biggest television network in the world at the moment. It's got the most people watching it. I wonder if there's going to be a transitional model away from, and it's not going to be today, tomorrow, next week, or next month, or even next year, but away from having to, things are starting to go behind paywalls. Things typically go in cycles, and a paywall is just a membership for people who don't get what I mean, because you think paywall, you think newspapers, but just there's a membership wall that you need to pay to get across. And that seems to be the style at the moment. But much like anything, things come and go, and I wonder if the next style will be back to free content and product placement and advertising and things like that to pay for it. And somewhere like YouTube will end up being the be all and end all. I think about, not that I really remember this myself, but I know the story of VHS versus Betamax, and eventually VHS won and Betamax was a product that just disappeared. I wonder eventually if one or two, I mean, Facebook won, all the other ones kind of fell away. I wonder if one of the streamers will win, maybe it'll acquire the others and all the rest will fade away or something. I don't know. Or else it'll move to a free model.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Hey, I feel like we're done today. We were going to talk about Mangere budgeting services.
But it's midday.
Yeah, but it's midday. And the Nets are playing Boston as I speak to you. Brooklyn's up 11-6. It's quite important for me to see that game.
I know exactly what that means.
Are you being sarcastic?
Yeah.
So
it's funny we're talking about Easter. There was a big hoopla because NASCAR had their race on Easter Sunday.
Yeah.
People did not like that. So it
The
was
Lord's
interesting what
Day.
we were saying about the kind of secularization of Easter Sunday.
The success of streaming services have caused a massive increase in content production globally. Additionally, competition has caused ridiculous production cost growth. Well, that's true about the content production. I mean, it used to be for stand-up comedians to get a special on HBO or Comedy Central was quite a rare thing. And now in America, especially, you know, every second comedian's got an hour on Netflix at the moment. But then again, if they've got $3 billion a month coming in, they've got to spend it on something. I mean, a stand-up hour might only cost, you know, $500,000 to make, less than that, $250K to make, because the crowd's already there, the performer's already there. It's just really the recording of it. So it's not an expensive thing to make. That's probably another reason they're popping up all over the place. But yeah, there's no question it's caused a massive amount of content. But as an interesting point Emperor makes about, it's also put up the cost of production, which I guess comes hand in hand, doesn't it? People can grease that palm. They typically do. All right. Well, no, the NBA finals are on right now, and it's a very interesting time because this comes back to our vaccine conversation. Kyrie Irving, who's like one of the top 10 players in the world, plays for Brooklyn, and he wasn't allowed to play at Brooklyn, but he was allowed to play on the road because the Brooklyn was a part of New York, and New York had vaccine restrictions. So he sat out the first half of the season, and then he started playing in the second half of the season, but only on road games. And there's Kevin Durant there missing a dunk. And now he's come back in the last, I think all restrictions are off now, and he is on fire. So they've officially come in at like 7th place in the playoffs, which is 7 out of 8, which doesn't sound very good, but they could easily win the whole thing. And they're currently playing the Celtics, who are arguably one of the top 2 or 3 favorite teams to win the whole thing. And even though it's the first round of the playoffs, Brooklyn, whoever wins this, I've already tweeted this, whoever wins this series, it's 2 versus 7 in the East, will be one of the finalists when they get to the final 2, potentially take it all. So I'm hoping Brooklyn wins, number 7 beating number 2. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, I know that means nothing to you and you don't care, but that's what I'm interested in watching today. It's only just started as well in the first quarter. So have you got any of that? Any of that hick stuff to watch? Any of that hick round and round circles in those zoomy cars at the moment?
Nah, not during the week.
No. Yeah, no. I've got a meeting at 2:00, and between now and 2:00, I'm gonna watch the basketball. And if I do some work, it'll be on in the background, like it literally is right now. Like it's up on my big screen, 3 feet from my face.
Now, what channel is it on?
I'm on ESPN because I'm a Sky subscriber.
All right.
So I'm watching it on an official channel. I'm sure there are many people who are watching it free through various online hacktivist sites, like George is probably going to do right now. All right, guys. Hey, thanks for joining us today. Tomorrow we've got a bit of a special on, actually. It's sort of, I'm sure we'll talk about some issues of the day, but I'm pretty sure it was the anniversary of same-sex marriage coming to New Zealand over Easter weekend. Ironically, the marriage has risen. It's risen from the dead. And the same weekend, I saw a couple of commentaries coming out of the US surrounding sort of what the right was saying about that very same community that got marriage equality here in New Zealand, and how the left was responding to it. And just over the subsequent days from that, I've ended up putting together like 3 or 4 or 5 things about how Republicans in America are speaking and treating sectors of society and community. And it might end up being most of the show tomorrow, but it'll be sort of several little chunks of what we're going to do. So it'll be a bit different tomorrow, but hopefully you'll join us from 11 and we'll be having a look at that, and be very keen to get your thoughts and input into anything that we would put out tomorrow as well. So until then, good to have you back, George. Thank you for being with us again today. I do appreciate your time. And for everybody else, we will see you tomorrow at 11 a.m. And thanks for being with us today. Hooroo.
13. They've made all three of their three-point tries thus far. Here goes Jay.